Today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers on the Varsity Podcast Network is brought to you by Varsity Search. Varsity Search builds great teams by connecting lawyers in Texas with career opportunities at small and boutique law firms. So if you're thinking of making a move or your law firm is looking to hire, please go to varsitysearch.com and book a time to visit right into my calendar. Varsity Search, building great teams. Hey everyone, Daniel here back with you on Lone Star Lawyers. I hope you and your family are both healthy and safe. Before we get to this episode, I want to let you know that you are always welcome to reach out to me if you have questions about the legal market, if you just want to talk through career options, have any of those conversations. We don't charge anything. We just want to help. So feel free to email me, daniel@varsitysearch.com, or you can go to varsitysearch.com/lawyers, and I hope to hear from you. All right, today we stay right here in Waco, where our guest is Julia Jurgensen. Julia is a partner with the full-service firm of Beard Kultgen, where she represents businesses and individuals in complex commercial litigation cases, including commercial contract disputes, construction disputes, and tort claims. More recently, Julia has broadened her construction law practice to include contract negotiation and consulting. And as if that wasn't enough, Julia is also a mom to young kids. We have kids that are in school together. Teaches Sunday school at her church, and is just all around one of the kindest people that you will ever meet. So with that, let's hop into our conversation with Julia Jurgensen on today's Monday Mentors episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Julia Jurgensen joins us now. Julia, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for having me.
Well, this is going to be fun, and even though we're in the same zip code here, we are also still doing these remotely and across the video conference platform, as all meetings are now, right?
Right. Of course, we're getting really good at it.
Yes, we are. Before we get too far in, I'd like for our audience to learn a little bit more about you and your firm and your practice. I gave a very brief intro just before we hopped into the conversation here, but tell us a little bit about your practice.
Okay. Well, I am in my, I didn't do the math before I came, but 15th year of practice, which seems like it can't be true, but it is.
Right.
I am a partner at Beard Kultgen, Rofi, Bostwick, and Dixon here in Waco. We have recently started referring to ourselves as the Beard Kultgen law firm because, as you can imagine, it is a mouthful. But I'm really proud of everyone that I work with, so I still use the long name.
That's awesome.
So my firm is a full-service law firm. We pretty much do. When people ask me what we do, it's easier to say what we don't do. But with the exception of family law and criminal matters, which we do a little bit of, but not as a specialty, we have attorneys here who pretty much specialize in almost all the areas. So between transactional litigation, estate planning, real estate, a little IP, we do pretty much everything that runs the gamut. We have 21 attorneys here, and we've had tremendous growth in the last few years. My personal background is litigation. I started out at a firm in Houston doing mass tort as a plaintiff's attorney and loved that experience. When I came back to Waco, I joined Beard Kultgen and continued my litigation practice, but added in quite a bit of commercial defense work. So I do a mix of both. I have a really a good plaintiff's case I'm working on that's taking up a lot of my time right now, but I do both. And I also have a pretty heavy construction law practice as well.
Awesome. Well, yeah, it sounds like a diverse practice for sure. Since, over the last maybe handful of months, and we're going to talk about COVID in just a minute and its impact on the firm and the practice. But within the areas that you spend the most time in from a practice standpoint, are there things that have been either changing or evolving, or new laws, or new things happening within the markets or within, just that are affecting your clients or anything like that are going on sort of within your areas of practice and specialty?
Well, of course, we're always keeping an eye, especially in the construction area, on changing laws. And there have been quite a bit in the last 4 to 5 years that have changed in terms of indemnity and sharing liability and assuming risk, transferring risk. So we try to stay abreast of those issues. Our attorneys meet every Thursday. We are not doing that in person right now, as you can imagine, but
right.
That we don't miss something, so that we're staying on top of the changing laws. And in terms of litigation, I mean, it's very specific to the client. I would say the biggest change, of course, and I know we're going to get there, but is just the way that we practice right now. I mean, we've been proficient at e-discovery for a long time, but it's even more important now. We are learning how to conduct depositions remotely, sign documents remotely. I mean, we've been doing these things, but we're really having to become experts in these areas very quickly and with very little warning. So in terms of litigation, our clients are facing changing and difficult times. In the areas of both transactional and litigation, they are, and we're just trying to do our best to stay relevant in those areas and make sure that we're able to provide the same quality of practice, just in a really different way. Now, I'm not sure that answered your question.
No, it does.
Everything's changing right now.
Yeah. Well, and I do want to follow up on one piece, and that's the construction law space, because it seems like, and we've had, two for sure that I know of, maybe more construction lawyers that are, in construction boutique law firms on the show in the past. And before I left the law school, it was an area of law that we had seen a pretty significant spike in terms of just hiring and opportunities for law students to enter in as sort of a niche practice. I'm just wondering if you would maybe share a little bit about just the construction law field in general, and for maybe people that are still, maybe in their first year or two of practice and doing some type of general litigation or trying to still figure out which area should I go into. What would be maybe some pros and cons or some things about the construction law industry or field that you would share with them? Sure.
Well, for my background, I did not leave law school thinking I would get into the construction law area.
Right.
I went to a plaintiff's firm. I was working on mass tort, primarily 1 or 2 cases at a time. But when I got back to Waco, our firm was general counsel and remains general counsel for the AGC. And so one of the attorneys I was working for had a very strong practice in the construction area, which really was born out of he worked construction before law school. And then when he got out of law school, of course, knew the area, or knew a lot of contractors in town. And so it just organically grew out of that. I was very interested in the practice. And honestly, Daniel, I really enjoyed the clients. Yeah. I find them to be down to earth, direct.
Yep.
So I can handle that. I had the good fortune of working with some really dear family friends early on. And so I enjoyed the client. I loved getting out in the job site. It took me out of the office. If you are at all interested in the areas of development, real estate, that goes hand in hand. And in Waco, we are experiencing and have experienced just amazing growth and development. So it felt very relevant as a practice, and it dovetailed right into litigation because, I do a lot of contract consulting for contractors, subcontractors, owners. But unfortunately, as we know, things go wrong. And so I end up having to step in when there are delays and damages for delays or defects or warranty issues. So it's a really fun area, and it's changing, but you can develop it and get to know it by really just getting to know the people that work in the area. And I've immensely enjoyed it. Yeah,
that's awesome. Thanks for that. And that actually leads into another thing I wanted to ask you about, which is the Waco market. We spend we cover the whole state here. And so we've talked to lawyers, obviously in the big markets of Dallas, Houston, and Austin, but also out in West Texas and East Texas, and then also here in Waco as well. But we don't get here enough. And so I'd love to just hear your thoughts on what it's been like to practice here in Waco, and maybe some thoughts on just the local bar, the folks here that you practice with and against, and talk about that a little bit.
Okay. Well, you may have to cut me off because I love Waco. I was born and raised here. I went to Baylor undergrad, Baylor Law School. I went to practice in Houston, as I've mentioned, but ended up, as many Waco people do, marrying a Waco guy. Yeah. And we moved back here. So I loved practicing in Houston. I should say that. I had a wonderful experience there. But I have, in the back of my mind, always hoped that I would end up back here. And did, obviously. I love practicing in Waco. I love that I oftentimes know my clients outside of work. I think that really brings I'm a relational person, so I enjoy working for people that I know, but I also think it helps me serve them when I know them and know their family. I think it also means that you more often than not are going to know the attorney on the other side of the case.
Right.
Or with whom you're working on a mutual, deal. But, I think that brings most of the time, with caveats, kind of a level of civility in Waco that maybe you wouldn't find with an anonymous person that you're dealing with on the other. At least it does for me. Yeah. I'm a lot less likely to escalate with someone that I'm going to see at church on Sunday, or I might run into at the local steakhouse, a football game, Baylor. So it's a fishbowl. It really is. I personally think that's a positive. I think it brings a really fun element to the practice of law. And of course, I think we have a wonderful bar. We have in Waco, I would say, and I say this because I did a couple of clerkships after my second year of law school in Dallas at big firms. And I had good experiences at both. And then I went to Houston and practiced at a plaintiff's firm, and a very large active plaintiff's firm. So I do feel like I have some experience in all, and there's positives to all of it. But I think Waco, I brag on Waco because I think we have just as sophisticated work, practice, and people. Our firm prides itself on our people and high academic achievement, good lawyers, but we get the benefit of living in this wonderful town. In a small town, and my, longest commute I've ever had is 20 minutes. So I live out, so it's
and that's
great.
20 minutes of straight driving, like not stopped, right?
I go through one light, and I get to too. So it's great. Our judges are great. They're in my experience, they're fair and thoughtful in their decisions. I've had primarily, of course, there's always exceptions, really positive experiences with our judges, win or lose, a positive experience. So I can't see enough good things about practicing law here in Waco.
That's awesome. And I obviously have very similar feelings about Waco, so I will let you speak for me in all those ways, and we'll move on. Everyone knows I'll second all that was just said. We mentioned it earlier, and I do want to ask you about COVID and the impact that's had on your clients and your practice, and a couple of other related things. So let's start there. Just obviously we're recording this for people listening to it maybe a few weeks later on September 17th. And I always like to do that just because there can be so much that changes between when we record these and when they actually come out. So what's been, as of September 17th, what's been kind of the more recent things happening around COVID in your practice?
Oh, my goodness. Well, we were laughing before we came on the air that it was not difficult for me to find a webcam around my office, as I needed one for this podcast because we've had to make some serious investments in our technology. I'm sure everyone has, and I'm sure the sentiment has been shared that we are participating in lots of Zoom depositions, hearings, meetings. We're figuring out how to best serve our elderly or high-risk population, which may not look like coming into this office as much as it did before. Right. We've made home visits. We've signed wills in the parking lot in people's cars with masks and shields on. And I think, in a lot of ways, our practice has, and I should say I'm so fortunate to say this, but our practice hasn't changed a lot. We have clients that need us. And so we have been really trying hard, scrambling at times to figure out how to really best serve our clients who are oftentimes in very stressful, turbulent, unknown situations in the most efficient and the safest way possible. So that's sort of the practice. I also handle a lot of our administrative work here at the firm, which includes HR. So on that front, we had to figure out really quick how to work remotely. And thankfully, again, we are back in our office full time, fully staffed, with lots of protocols in place, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So many. And they're changing. We're trying to make sure that we're keeping up with that. We don't want to be comfortable just because we've been fortunate enough to be safe here at our office. But I think that we figured out really quickly that the practice of law doesn't have to look like it's always looked. And so we figured out how to get the most out of our people at home, and our people figured out how to get the most out of themselves at home. And I'm bragging, but I think our people have done a really good job with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's sort of been a fairly constant refrain, I think, in terms of the surprise that many have had in terms of how well it's been able to, or people have been able to adapt to working remotely or from home or whatever, and still be productive and still get things done and all of that. And, two things that we were talking just at the beginning of this about how quickly things change. And even like some of the things you were just talking about, I'm thinking about, okay, before we came on, I know that the governor was giving a press conference about reopening more of the Texas economy. So I don't know what's happening. I don't know what he's saying. I don't know, what that means for anybody, but potentially there's ramifications for clients of lawyers and legal practice and offices and all of that. I don't know. So, those types of things are always, it seems like happening. There's something always happening that can force us to adapt again, hopefully in a more positive direction now than going the other way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But and then in terms of some of those things that we have learned about how we can be lawyers remotely and by video and through technology, what are some things, if any, that you're expecting or hoping maybe will stay and be part of how we practice moving forward? As opposed to just kind of ratcheting back to where we were, back in January, February.
Right. Yeah. That's a great question. I've thought a lot about that, both in my personal life and professional. I think that there are so many positives in this. I mean, aside from just, hygiene, right? Just keeping people safe and healthy is better for your firm. And so having people out sick affects your productivity. So we've learned a lot about keeping ourselves safe. But on the other side of the practice part, I think that obviously we were becoming more and more digital. We've been doing that since I started practice with a BlackBerry.
Right.
But I think that what I hope that will remain, and this dovetails into what we might get into in terms of work-life balance, that when, and I'm a woman, obviously, so I think for women, especially those with children, I have children, learning how to be productive in flexible situations is going to help both you professionally and your firm. And so figuring out how to make it work from home when otherwise it was just easier to go into the office, right? Yeah. I think that is huge. I think that's huge for any parent, anybody that's caring for someone, anyone that wants a flexible work-life balance. Learning how to be your best lawyer when you're not in the four walls is going to be a positive moving forward. So that's the biggest thing. Now, the caveat to that is I don't think there's a replacement for being in the firm. I tell my younger attorneys, we've had some like, well, can I just keep working from home and never come back? And I don't think that's good either. I don't. I think when we need to, it's good to be able to, but I don't think there's a substitute, especially for a young attorney trying to get work, to be here and step in and say, hey, I'm not busy. What do you have for me? So being able to do both is really important. And I think we're constantly going to be figuring out how to better do that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And that last point especially is one that's been brought up a couple of times here in terms of and this is not COVID related, this is just in terms of good practices from young associates about how to go about getting work and going kind of door to door and asking for work. And while it may seem like, oh, everybody can be just as productive and everything can work perfectly remotely or from home, that becomes a lot more complicated if you're having to somehow call or text or Zoom in to every office to ask for work. That's a different thing than just kind of knocking on the door and poking your head in. So I'm glad you mentioned that. There are cons and downsides to being at home. Even if we feel like people are generally still as productive or can be as productive, there are some things that just can't be replicated by video as much as we might like them to be.
Absolutely. I can't stress that enough. I mean, especially if you're needing work, you don't have an established book, it's way different to text. And I tell people here, we don't mean to forget about those people that are at home, but the bottom line is we're busy and we get to working, and the person that's standing next to me might just get that task that I just was assigned or just had come in the door. So yeah, I 100% feel that it is very important to be in the office with your team.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, since you mentioned it, because I don't want to forget about it, I do want to go ahead and have the conversation with you about work-life balance. So, because I think that's an important component to this, because it was really something that was already being talked about and discussed quite a bit within the legal field before COVID happened, obviously, and something that young lawyers were already struggling with, either how to think about it or how to raise it with their, supervising lawyers or however else. So as we're now through this COVID season, looking at it maybe through a little bit of a new lens, how would you advise young lawyers to think about the work-life balance issue, if we're even calling it that anymore? I don't know exactly. Work-life harmony, work-life whatever. And what are some important things to be thinking about along those lines?
Well, again, you may have to stop me because I feel really strongly about this one. I think it's hard. I think the word balance is constantly changing, or balance, what that means to you is changing as your life changes. What I would say, and what I've said to young people who I've talked to and mentored in law school, think about it now. I mean, if there are law students listening to this, I would say, think about it when you're in law school, and meaning think about what kind of firm that you want to join, or what kind of practice do you want to have? Do you want to go in-house? Do you want to go to or you want to start your own firm, or go to a small firm, medium, large? I think what I did not do, and luckily it just worked out great for me, but what I did not do well in law school, I was focused on getting good grades and getting what I deemed to be the best job. And I didn't really think, I might be thinking in 5 years about starting a family. I might be thinking in 10 years about having 3 kids and 3 schedules, and my husband owns his own business and is very busy. So I think, one, think about it early on, because that matters. It matters where you interview, and it matters where you focus your job search. Because, like I said, I kind of ran the gamut, but there are very different expectations at different places.
Right.
And if you're going to be measured by the billable hour and expect to be bill 8 hours a day, which that's a universal expectation, no matter where you go, then that's a long day. No matter what, that's a long day. It is hard work being an attorney that bills by the hour, or any kind of attorney, but it's a hard way to measure your productivity. So I would think I would plan ahead. That is not my strong suit. I'm learning it as I go. I like to kind of take life as it comes, but think about what you want to, especially as a woman and as someone like me. I was single. I wasn't married. Those kinds of things weren't on my radar, but I think as much as you can, try to visualize what you want your practice to look like. Do you know now you want to practice full time always? Or do you think at some point in your future, you might want to practice part-time? And again, that matters. I have friends from law school who that is just not an option for them. It is work time or don't work. For me here, I work with amazing people that value family and for our women, especially, they've been able to work with me. I've taken on a lot of the administrative management of the firm. I've been very selective about the cases that I take in, and they've really worked with me, because if they hadn't, for me personally, I don't think I'd still be around.
Yeah.
It came to the point where it was either be flexible or just manage my life, at home and my kids. So, really thinking and being intentional about where you want to be in 5-10 years is super important.
Yeah. And I think too, when you get into a firm, or, if you go work wherever, a government, in-house, like you were saying, wherever, and as you're in those first couple or 3 years of practice, maybe in that situation like you were in, maybe not married yet, not having kids or anything, but starting to think about it, one of the good things you can do, I think, is look ahead at the people that are going through that stage right now and see how has the firm responded to them wanting to stay at home some, or take how much leave time, or bring the baby up to the office in the afternoons. I mean, how is that happening? And talk to those young moms, young dads, whatever, and kind of get a sense of, okay, how has it been for you? What's it been like? What would you do different? Where would you still be, or would you go somewhere else? I mean, because you don't have to just kind of hypothetically think about it. You can, but then you can also just literally watch. How is it being handled in your current workplace from people that are maybe 5, 7, 8 years ahead, right?
Absolutely. Yes. I have loved being that for younger people. When I joined the firm, it was me and 4 men, I think. I mean, at the time we were smaller, and they were, 30 years into their practice. And so I didn't have that. Now, again, it's worked out so wonderfully for me, but now that I am, midway through, it has been nice to be able to sort of model that in some way, and mine different than the next person's. But I love to visit with young people, and I think that's really smart to just watch how other parents, other people who are trying to achieve a work-life balance have done it for themselves. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, one of the last subjects I want to talk to you about is and you mentioned that you in addition to your practice as part of the firm, you're also involved in the administrative side and HR side as well. And as you said, you've been growing quite a bit, I would say, in the last handful of years. So I want to ask you about that. First off, when you're hiring an associate, and I'm thinking in particular about those that are maybe, like I said before, like out in maybe have a couple of years of experience, and it'd be a kind of a lateral associate hire, that kind of thing. What are some things that you're looking for on a resume and a cover letter, kind of in that first initial screening phase, to see whether or not this is a person that we would want to further consider? What are some important things, or things that maybe automatically put them in the no pile?
Well, so I guess first and foremost, and I don't know if some may disagree with this strategy, but I see a lot of resumes. I still look at their grades in law school. I don't put anybody in the no pile. Well, that's not true. I guess I have. That do pretty bad. But I do, Daniel. I think, at our firm, we really pride ourselves on holding our attorneys to a high standard when it comes to the quality of our practice.
Yeah.
And I have found that a lot of times, and there are exceptions, that is consistent with holding them to a high standard academically. So we start there, and we look at, were they on the law review? Were they active on the law review? Did they edit? Were they an editor? Were they published? So I start with school. And like I said, there's going to be, I always like to hear people's story, because a lot of times there's always a story, right, behind a blip on the radar, but we start there. Of course, I try to look, if it's a lateral, I want to know if they have a book of business. And maybe that doesn't matter for what we're looking for, but sometimes it does. And so, are their clients going to follow them? We really here, we also look at the bottom and say, what do they do? I mean, I am as interested in what they do outside of work and what they did outside of, even in high school. That's one of our favorite questions is, what'd you do in high school? Or tell me about this. You got, for mine, I always put the Little League World Series championship on my resume, right? Because that just leads into a conversation that's not all about, boring stuff, right?
Right, right.
I want to hear more about them. So I always look there next, because I want to know what kind of person they are. We have a lot of different people here at our firm, but everyone here has to fit in with our firm's culture, or it will be a miserable experience for them, and it won't work out long term. So we look at the person. We look at the whole person, and I want to see something more just about their grades and their work on their resume.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny you mentioned the at the bottom of the resume where most people would put their interests or their outside stuff at the bottom of the resume. And I had a last week or week before, I can't remember, but wrote just a short LinkedIn post about the question of whether to include interests on a resume for a legal resume, because it's one that has some back and forth and some pretty staunch advocates on both sides of that. Like, no, it doesn't matter. We don't care. We just want to know what you've done and whatever. And then a whole other group that says exactly what you just said. So what my point of my post was saying, my general counsel has been like, if you have some interesting interests to include them. So like, for example, yours is perfect, because I think if someone would say, I played softball, I probably wouldn't include that on an interest section of a resume, but I might talk about it in an interview as like I learned competitiveness and teamwork, whatever, but on a resume, I probably wouldn't put it. But if I played in the Little League World Series or won the Little League World Series and was with a Little League powerhouse like you were back then, that's more interesting. And that would catch my eye if I'm reviewing a resume. And so I think I said something similar about running. Like, if you've run 8 Boston marathons, that's different than if you go running to just run, whatever. Like, there's differences with that. So anyway, interesting that you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know there was a bit of debate on that, but
yeah, there is.
In the category of put it on there. Now, again, if it says I like to cook, I mean, okay. But if you really have things that will draw out who you are, absolutely, I say include them. I love that part.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'll say too, just as a heads up warning, I don't know if you do this, but like if someone says something like I like to cook, every time when I do practice interviews and everything else for people, I will usually ask, what's the last thing you made? Or I will ask them about that interest. Like, I want to hear, like, if you just put that on there because it sounds cool or sounds like it's kind of, clever or whatever, like, no, I want to. And so if someone says, oh man, last night I baked this incredible blah, 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 like, okay, cool. That's awesome.
That's legit. Right?
Or if it's like deer in the headlights, oh, it's been a while since I've cooked. I was like, well,
don't put that on there.
No, don't put it on there. What about in the interview setting? What are some things that you look for in interviews that set people apart?
Well, I look for, again, the way that I look for a balanced person. So that I'm obviously looking at how we do interviews is I usually start out just the two of us. And then, if it's going well and I can see this leading into a second, I'll invite some other partners in. We laugh because we kind of have a gang mentality. You might have 15 of us around the table, but that's because here at our firm, we are friends and a lot of us hang out outside of work.
Right.
And again, I don't want to paint the picture that, oh, you have to fit in and be cool and want to hang out with us. No, but do you need to be able to get along? I'm looking for characteristics that would show me that you have integrity, that you're honest, that you'll look me in the eye. Honestly, I mean, because sometimes you take for granted. People don't. I want them to ask me questions too. And I don't want the canned, oh, I thought of this. I was looking at your website. I mean, I want to see that they are as interested in us as we are in them. And so I'm looking for kind of that person that can engage in an interactive, mutual conversation with me about their experience, about their business, about their grades, but also about their life and them as a person, and not shy away from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff for sure. Well, we've got a handful of just rapid fire questions to end our time because it's already gone. This would happen so fast. I told you beforehand this would happen.
You did go really fast. Okay.
I know. And so I'm glad we went to the work-life balance when we did, because I knew that was going to happen if we didn't. So, all right. Are you ready for rapid fire questions?
Probably not, but shoot.
Yeah. The most important component of the conversation, right? All right. Name one characteristic that you most want to see in an associate.
Oh gosh, there's lots. I would say a strong work ethic. I need to see that right away.
Yeah, good one. What habit has been key to your success?
I don't know if this qualifies as a habit, but I'm going to say keeping things in perspective for me has been key, is every day.
Yeah, well, it definitely counts. Your favorite app or productivity tool?
Well, you've already learned my technological deficiencies in trying to get this set up. I am old school. I rely heavily on a paper list. I scratch things off. I change it daily, and I keep both an electronic and a paper planner as a backup. I love paper.
You know what? It's funny. Honestly, I would say this is like number 45 or 50 conversations on here. There are a significant percentage of people that answer with something along those lines. And so you are not alone. A lot of old school paper, pencil, the whole thing. So no worries. Your favorite social distancing activity?
Oh, my goodness. There's so many. I would say this one. My kids are involved in sports, particularly baseball and softball right now, and soccer. I coach my daughter, and it is my favorite thing because I can spread out on the field, but still get to do something that I love. So yeah. I'm going to go with that.
That's a great one. And then lastly, your favorite legal movie?
Okay, this is hard. I mean, I'm such a nerd. I like them all. But Erin Brockovich stands out to me as my very favorite.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How come?
Oh, because I think early on I related to her. I mean,
yeah.
My first job.
You were doing plaintiff stuff. Yeah.
I mean, I like both sides of the docket, but I really, really was inspired by her grit, her determination, and her drive to right or wrong. I mean, I have a strong justice gene, and so anybody that can relate to that, they did that very well. Of course, I love Julia Roberts.
Well, yeah, who doesn't, right?
Right. Yeah, I love that.
That's awesome. Well, and that one is, I think, slated to be our next movie verdicts episode on here. So I don't know if Robert Callahan and I do deep dives into legal movies in this same podcast feed. And so we've done like 6 of them so far, but I think he had suggested to me the next one he wanted to do was Erin Brockovich. So that might be next.
I will. I love Rob. He's a classmate of mine, and I definitely have to tune in for that.
Yeah. I don't know. We may recruit you to jump in and be on that one with us. We'll see.
I have to do it. I need to watch it and brush up. I need to watch it. But
with a lot of these, I'm watching them multiple times before we record because it's been so long since I've seen some of them. So yeah, it's fun to go back because you pick up things that you didn't notice with the first time you've seen it and all sorts of weird stuff. So
yeah, okay. Now you've inspired me. That might be our weekend movie.
Yes, there you go. Awesome. Well, Julia, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. I know you're really busy with so much stuff, so I appreciate you sharing your time with us.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed this conversation.
All right. My thanks again to Julia Jurgensen for joining us on the show. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider doing 2 things for me? Would you subscribe so you don't miss an episode? And then would you rate and review the podcast in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts? If you have suggestions or thoughts about the show, if I could help you in any way, please email me directly, daniel@varsitysearch.com. Also, don't forget, if you or someone you know could benefit just from a conversation about the legal market, career options, anything at all like that, you can, again, email me or you can go to varsitysearch.com/lawyers. All right, that's it for today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Thanks again so much to each of you for listening. I'm Daniel here with Varsity Search, and we'll talk with you next time.